Are you ready for your next performer? Are you ready to see us move some mics around? That there is Mr. Jack Walsh with the lady from Fargo. I don't know her name. What do I look like? The IMDb? It's my third IMDb joke of the night. Have another one, Jason. Jack Walsh is an award-winning writer and producer whose work has been featured on American public television, in Creative Loafing, at DragonCon, and as part of the Atlanta Fringe Festival. He has been described as kind of funny-looking on more than one occasion. So please applaud both Jack Walsh and the trailer for Fargo!
When I was 7, the kid who lived across the street from my mamaw convinced me to break into a neighbor's house, explaining that since his dad was the landlord, it was really his house. We walked in on some people in a dimly lit room who yelled at us to get out. At the time, I assumed they'd been napping, but looking back, it's pretty clear they were having a nooner. Running out the front door pretty much marked the end of my only criminal partnership, so I guess I don't really understand how those normally work. We never learn exactly how Steve Buscemi's Carl linked up with Peter Stormare's Gare prior to the events depicted in Fargo. Was it through some sort of employment agency for kidnappers? An arrangement through the hired thug union? You'd think they would have figured out earlier that it wasn't going to be a productive relationship. They could have just called it quits with thanks, but no thanks, and a handshake rather than a lot of screaming and an axe in the neck. They seemed to be freelance, calling their own shots. Being coworkers was entirely up to them. Unfortunately, I was stuck with Wisdom. According to official paperwork, his real name was something like Kevin, but he insisted on Wisdom with a Z. At least that's what I'm going to call him here. His real name, or rather the real fake name that he gave himself, was just as uniquely ridiculous. So it's not like I could say Wisdom and you'd say, oh, Wisdom Lundergaard, and I could go, nope, totally different Wisdom. Don't say I was talking shit about Wisdom Lundergaard, because that guy's cool. Obviously, he's not here to tell his side of the story, so it wouldn't be fair for me to besmirch his name. His silly, silly name. It would be difficult to spell out the details of my conflict with Wisdom, a bullet-pointed Nixonian list of grudges. To say that we repeatedly clashed, that our work relationship was one of open hostility, would not be accurate. It was more like a Cold War campaign of simmering covert maliciousness. Obviously, he never put me in a wood chipper. The scene in Fargo where Gare does this to Carl, spoiler alert, Carl dies, is the culmination of the movie's escalating bloodshed, throwing a torrent of crimson onto the snowy landscape. But absent an explosion of gore here and there, the majority of the film sticks to a color palette that could best be described as seasonal affective disorder. While I'm never going to be the person to greet even a sunny summer morning with a you betcha attitude, I tend to get especially morose in the first quarter of the year, even here in Atlanta, where winters are mild and just the mention of snow can push us to the brink of an extinction-level event. And my first winter here was a tough one. I'd made a mistake, not a forgot to put the tags on my ill-gotten car and had to kill a state trooper and 2 witnesses mistake, but still. Just after Christmas, I'd taken a position doing audio-visual and computer tech support at a medical school. I say taken, it was more like was inexplicably given. I can use a computer just fine. I'd been a video editor before I moved here, but I'm honestly not particularly great with the nuts and bolts of what makes computers do, computer things. I was grateful to have a job, but I had no idea why they picked me to work alongside Wisdom. He was as humble as you might expect of someone who had selected that name for himself. The kind of person who would embed inspirational quotes in his email signature, but they would be his own quotes, or at least attributed to him. We were supposed to work in tandem, but I think Wisdom saw me as an assistant and a subordinate. This was fine at first, as I was still getting up to speed, but when he went out for a few weeks with a back injury, he started to see me as a usurper. Maybe that's too, grandiose a term to use, given that much of the job just consisted of showing up and unlocking multimedia classrooms. I hadn't been the most innovative video editor in the world at my previous job, although I thought my TV career was going okay. But now, here I was, back at square one in the much less dynamic field of opening doors and flipping light switches. It didn't exactly feel like a fresh start. Of course, mid-February never does. These days, I take something to keep me on more of an even keel all year round, so winter in Atlanta doesn't really hit me quite as hard as it used to, although I can't say I've really worked out all the kinks yet. Ask your doctor if trading episodic depression for jaw-clenching anxiety is right for you. A number of scientists, and by a number, I mean some whose work has been paraphrased on Wikipedia, believe that seasonal affective disorder is the evolutionary vestige of a hibernation response. This theory also offers an explanation as to why some people have the urge to pack in the fatty foods during winter months. For instance, people who work in places where lunches are provided by pharmaceutical companies who realize that a way to a future doctor's heart is through the stomach. I had been used to having carrot sticks and granola for lunch, but now I was regularly eating cheesesteaks with the cardiology department. Emergency medicine favored Papa John's pizza, the quick and only under desperate circumstances option of the food world. On Wednesdays, obstetrics chain-smoking secretary would insist that I hit the Chinese buffet brought in for the family planning luncheon. A cholesterol test from this time period would confirm that, medically speaking, my blood was turning to gravy. It was at these lunches that I realized that, while wisdom was no longer speaking directly to me, he was definitely talking to everyone else. I would have conversations with people who, it eventually became clear, were trying to feel me out to see if I was indeed the Macbeth of entry-level tech support. I didn't think I was, but I found myself trying to interpret the facial expressions and body language of everyone else I had to deal with. Med students, doctors, department heads. Did they think I was lying? That I was out to destroy wisdom? That I kind of sucked at my job? Okay, that last one might have been largely true, but still, as someone with a nearly pathological need to be liked, all of this left me feeling paranoid, frustrated, fucked over, and increasingly demoralized as I boarded the hospital shuttle bus home every day. It certainly didn't help that these rides were soundtracked by the terrible smooth jazz the driver played on the radio. Look, I like jazz just fine. I mean, I knew the song in that Fargo trailer was Caravan from Thelonious Monk Plays Duke Ellington without having to look it up. I had a rather embarrassing beatnik phase in college where I listened to nothing but bebop and used really outmoded slang, if you crazy cats can dig it. But this was the kind of music people are thinking of when they say they hate jazz. I know my flaws pretty well. I know who I am. And who I am is someone who will absolutely wallow in misery when given the opportunity. But listening to Kenny G is just asking for too much. I had a car radio transmitter for my iPod, and I started bringing it with me so I could interfere with the station signal until the driver switched it off. It worked remarkably well, and yes, I know it was a dick thing to do and probably a violation of some FCC regulation or something. Maybe the thugs in Fargo started out in tech support. It's probably a slippery slope from there to kidnapping and murder. So I left. That's the short version, which is better because it sounds like I said, fuck all y'all, stuffed wisdom into the nearest landscaping equipment, and walked out in slow motion as fiery mayhem erupted behind me. But in truth, the place where I'd interviewed a few months earlier had hired someone who didn't work out. So they called their second choice. Okay, their third choice, possibly their fourth. Maybe I should have been a little offended or played hard to get, but I was so happy to get out that I even took a pay cut. And just like that, Wisdom was my new best friend. He joked with me, gave me tips on which department had the best lunch that day, stopped interfering with my job. Was it because I wouldn't be around anymore? No doubt. Because he'd succeeded in getting rid of me? Probably. So I wouldn't talk shit about him during my exit interview with HR? Maybe, but it didn't work. He was the last person I spoke to on the day I left, mainly because he wouldn't let me leave after everyone else had said goodbye. He was very insistent that any difficulties between us were the fault of our supervisor. Obviously, our boss was a terrible manager when it came to personnel, and I didn't argue, but mainly it was just because I wanted to get away as soon as possible. Just before I finally did, at Wisdom's insistence, we hugged. It was weird, but after that, as I walked to the bus, it felt like spring had arrived.
Jack Walsh, everybody!